Time now for the Newsmaker, and following its fortnight-long refusal to describe Hamas as terrorists, even though they entered Israel on the 7th of October and claimed over 1,400 lives, and after wrongly pointing the finger at Israel for the bombing of a hospital in Gaza, which led to 300 deaths, has the BBC become the laughingstock of the world? Well, they certainly are in Israel, where some of their top comedy stars have released a sketch mocking our national broadcaster. It's hilarious. Take a listen.
Good evening from London. Here are some news from the war in Gaza. Israel has bombed a hospital, killing hundreds of innocent people. More. Much better. With more details, our Middle East correspondent, Harry Whitegilt.
Good evening, Rachel, from the illegal colony of Tel Aviv. Israeli officials has denied bombing the hospital, but we have video footage showing what really happened indeed.
Absolutely shocking, Harry.
So, are the BBC a laughing stock? I thought that was a brilliant sketch, but let's get the views now of tonight's Newsmaker, former government minister and television personality Anne Widdecombe. And the BBC have become the story, haven't they? And they're being laughed at. This is a problem.
They are. I mean, nobody takes them seriously, or very few people take them seriously. And whereas they used to have a voice that was real authority, and if you wanted the facts, you listened to the BBC, and you know, the days of the great broadcasters like Richard Dimbleby, Robin Day, you believed what was being said. But the BBC is, over many years, there's nothing new about this, and it's not been peculiar to any government. Over the years, the BBC has become gradually more and more left-wing. If you look at its reporting during COVID, you know, there was the government line very clearly printed saying, you know, that not all these deaths were due to COVID. It was simply people who had tested positive within 28 days or whatever the period was. And the BBC used to say, in terms, these people had died of COVID. Now, that is straightforward misreporting, and it's the Beeb. And they do that all the time in numerous ways, but to have actually refused to call Hamas a terrorist organization, treating it as if it's a country, and it really mustn't take sides against terrorism, that, I think, will have convinced a lot of people that the BBC has just thoroughly lost its way. And, you know, I mean, all the pressure is for a ceasefire. Israel cannot have a ceasefire. Israel is fighting a war which it's got to win. And, you know, letting Hamas simply regroup and, you know, and regather by giving a ceasefire is a piece of lunacy. They've got to win this war.
Now, Anne, as a former Home Office minister, prisons minister, you've doubtless sat in on Cobra-style meetings. The BBC wrongly pointed the finger at Israel for the bombing of a Gaza hospital. Tragically, 300 deaths. Now, the Beeb corrected their position days later, but the damage was done. A propaganda coup for Hamas.
Yes, they just went in where angels fear to tread and said, you know, this is the answer and this is what happened. And then, of course, you know, when there's a cooler analysis and a proper examination of the evidence, it transpires that's not what happened at all. Well, why couldn't they wait? Is it just the pressure of having to be melodramatic and, you know, get melodramatic news out immediately? Or is it simply that they've lost altogether the perspective of proper, impartial, careful, analytical reporting, if they know the meaning of any of those words?
Well, Anne, you said the word impartial. Is it an anti-Israel bias at the Beeb?
I think that is pretty evident. Well, the Beeb would deny it. But I think in the way that they have approached the nomenclature of Hamas, and not calling it terrorism, the way that they have reported Israeli activity as if it is a fact and then it's later shown not to be, all the emphasis hugely on the civilian casualties in Gaza. I mean, never mind what's going on in Israel. I would say they haven't been impartial on this. I would say it's something that Ofcom actually ought to look at.
The BBC broadcast hundreds of hours of radio and television a week. They have argued Though when it comes to calling Hamas terrorists, they've stressed the importance of not taking sides and have argued that they have followed journalistic protocol. And regarding the hospital tragedy in Gaza, they've identified their mistake. And of course, all journalists do make mistakes. And let's talk about the Prime Minister now, if we can. The Observer are reporting that Rishi Sunak will use next week's King's Speech to advance the expansion of North Sea oil and gas exploration, as well as pro-car policies, in the hope of opening up a clear divide over the green agenda with Labour. Is it the right thing to do, and will it work?
I mean, I assume that the Conservative Party has actually been watching and listening to Reform UK and has seen the popularity of some of its measures. And it began with ULAs, of course, and now they're looking beyond that. I mean, people will put up with anything as long as it's government spending, because they think that's somehow nothing to do with them. When they have to spend money on boilers and on new cars and all the rest of it, when they have to do that and it actually hits home, then they're much less keen on all this theory. And theory is what it is. There is absolutely no evidence whatever that if we don't do something by 2035, it will be too late. There is no evidence of that.
So could this policy, this slight reversal on net zero, deliver dividends for Rishi Sunak in a year's time? Could it move the dial for him politically?
I think it could. I think people will find it a bit cynical because he's always sung the merits of net zero. I think they'll find it a bit cynical, but given that Keir Starmer is sticking with the net zero targets and is sticking with all the policies which will impact so heavily on ordinary citizens, and particularly on citizens who aren't that well off, I think, yes, it could open up some ground. Perhaps he'd now like to listen to Reform UK on a few other things as well and open up a bit more ground.
More importantly, listen to Anne Widdecombe, Pearls of Wisdom, every Sunday night at 10:15. Anne, we'll catch you in a week's time. Thank you so much for joining us.